Welcome to another episode of the early days of micromobility. On this podcast episode, I have Aléxandros and Augustine as a guest. I have been following their work for quite some time, so I'm very excited that they were able to find some time to join me on this podcast episode to discuss our industry, mobility, the past, the present, the future, but most importantly, I just want to discuss the facts and the numbers because these are the right people to discuss this with. So thank you very much, and let's just get started. So just as with every guest on this podcast, before we go into the whole micromobility discussion, I want to know what drives you, what is pushing you to do what you do, and why you joined this crazy micromobility industry. So please tell us why you do what you do.
So maybe one comment first. So full disclosure, I like my main job and where I earn the money to feed my family is at Volkswagen passenger cars brand. But I don't represent them here on this podcast today. So everything that I share is my personal opinion, my personal passion, and has nothing to do with what I do for Volkswagen as a brand or as a group. And then to your question, Konstantin, what is my passion, or what do I want to achieve, and to cover the industry, to bring like international stories to the German market as well, in ride sharing, but then also in bike sharing, moped sharing, and other like shared modes of transportation. And basically since then I involved over time, I started to deep dive in the data, in the analytics that are out there. I track then also the hardware development and everything that's going on there. And it's very exciting and it's fast moving. We are just there at the beginning. But it's just fun to be in there and to exchange with people like you guys, with like then also the leaders in the industry, with the different players, see how they evolve over time. So that's basically my story, how I link to the micromobility space here.
Wow. Thank you very much for sharing that. I mean, you've been around for a long time, so it all makes sense now. What about you, Aléxandros? Please share your story.
Before that, actually, I was very surprised. I was thinking you say kind of on the start of the industry. I was thinking we're in the mature phase, but maybe we can discuss that in a bit.
We are on the early
anyways,
days,
nice
so...
to meet you guys.
Yep.
Yeah, I suppose so. The name of the podcast as well. So, my name is Aléxandros. Originally Greek, based in Barcelona currently. My career was kind of, let's say, similar with Augustine. I spent most of my career actually with Toyota Motor Europe. Stayed 5 years there in Brussels, from corporate planning in the beginning and then to central supplier operations. And at that time I was in Brussels, I started seeing something weird, started seeing scooters on the street. I was like, oh, that is new, a couple of months only before they were in the United States, in Los Angeles. I was like, oh, that seems quite interesting. And I went, I remember I was on the street with my then girlfriend and I stopped everything and I went to touch the bird scooter, was looking up and down. And I was like, I like this thing. Later on, Dott launched with their hardware as well from Quickwheel, which I thought was quite good. And I started using them frequently. So based on my job at that time with Toyota, I was like, it's more or less the same thing for 100 years, right? You have a car and you have basically more or less the same thing of transportation. Of course, now there is the evolution with fuel cell, electric batteries, and even arrival, if we put it with the microfactories. Anyway, I don't want to go very far away, but I felt that the micromobility and sharing industry overall is taking momentum. So I wanted to join that. So I quit, and basically 2 years and a half after, here we are. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you very, very much for sharing your stories. It seems that you really entered this industry out of passion and out of excitement for seeing scooters or seeing the industry. But I want to know a little bit what you think about the whole industry, how it evolved, because at the beginning, we have to say it was a bit crazy. It came from the United States, right? As you mentioned, Birds was one of the first, and then it came to Europe, but in a way, Europe is leading right now. Congrats to Thierry for buying Spin. Great move. But what was your opinion, or what did you think when you looked at the industry at the very beginning, and there was so much money going in, and Bird and Lime, they were launching all over the world, and I know you were writing, analysis of the market about the hardware. Lime had a very specific scooters in terms of hardware, but we will go into the hardware later on. But first, I want to know what your thoughts were on the growth of the industry early on when you saw so much money coming in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned already a lot. I think it's the industry is there still at the beginning. I mean, it's none of them has like a profitable business model. You see definitely different stories, like Tier that's building equity story around like technology they buy, about other operators they buy. Also like to expand in different verticals. It's like the next bike acquisition. I think that's adding a lot of credibility to them for then also like towards the investors. And if they want to go public, then I think they try to avoid what's happened to like others in the market, like Bird and Helbitz, for example. I mean, look at their story. It's quite sad to see, to be honest. I think that like at the beginning, it was definitely like super crazy. I mean, like the early Uber days, yeah, you had a cash load of money. You had they hired people like crazy. They expanded in markets like crazy without talking to the cities, and with like also not like kind of like toy hardware, like the early hardware devices they had. And I think they learned a lot. There was like a super fast development on the hardware, on the devices side. Also cities getting more involved. They say, okay, look, that's something we can, or that makes sense to have in our city to replace like maybe car trips or like other forms of mobility. But there's still a lot of potential. Yeah, I don't know what's the percentage of urban trips that's done by scooters today, but in comparison to other modes, it's definitely tiny. So a few percentages maybe. There's a lot of room, and I'm curious to see how the story evolves here. I would also agree that we will see more consolidation. Then will be hard for like smaller players. I would say there's like a lot of progress also in the future on the hardware side. So we are really just at the beginning, and there are exciting times ahead.
It's actually very interesting. So I was doing an analysis a while back, a couple of months back, and it was more than 3.4 billion within a couple of years that they were already spent by VCs or whoever else investing in these kind of companies. So there is definitely something going on there. But overall, I will think that the market, at least in my opinion, starts to get a bit more mature. So we see the consolidation that you mentioned before with Tier buying Spin, buying Nextbike, buying a couple of also technology companies like Phantasmo, Makery, Busby. But the batteries, the exchange, I forgot the name now. The UK startup in the beginning. But anyways, so you see some consolidation happening. And in my opinion, you can also see that with the numbers, right? So I think the start in the beginning is the full expansion, right? There is a lot of money coming in. Nobody, I think, knew what they were doing, but basically just launching different markets. It's these classic KPIs. Yeah, we have from 0 scooters and 0 markets to suddenly, 3,000 scooters, 10,000 scooters, 50 markets or whatever. So that is attractive for investors. But then we hit a plateau where unit economics start playing a role, I think. And this is the phase that, if you remember, 2019-20, that companies start firing. So Lime fired people, Uber fired people. So basically we're in this, let's say, plateau that the whole expansion phase kind of dropped down, although we will see still companies like Tier expanding very aggressively. But yeah, I think we're at that moment now that kind of makes more sense. People know what they do. The cities are into it as well. So yeah.
Nextbike is pretty huge, even in Germany. Vienna, East European. It's going to be hard.
Czech Republic is quite big.
It's going to be hard for operators to launch bike share and wherever Nextbike operates. So yeah.
It depends, Konstantin, how they use that also for the scooter business, right? Because I was still mentioning it's completely different business. It's kind of public transportation. At least this is literally the model for Germany. So you buy basically a carnet, And yeah, you use it for the train, metro, or whatever, buses, and the bike sharing. So for me, it would be very interesting to see how they possibly can combine the two things. Of course, the city has to be involved, and probably there will be a lot of changes. But in Poland, yet here, it doesn't have the numbers yet. So will Nextbike help them reach the scooter numbers? We don't know, but it is for sure an interesting move.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm not sure if Thier will do a lot of changes with Nextbike. I think that, I mean, from my point of view, I think they will just let Nextbike be Nextbike, like how Nextbike has been able to be great all these decades, and stay with the same model, because that model works, especially in terms of government relations. And yeah, I think Thier will use those government relations to, whenever they need to launch scooters in Poland or whatever. Yeah, they already have Nextbike in Poland, right? So what do you think?
But I'm completely with Aléxandros there. I mean, they could use it also as a platform to sell to the cities. Okay, look, you are now funding the bikes. But what about if you fund other like vehicles as well? Yeah, we have like scooters. Exactly. People love them. Yeah, I mean, let's try it. Subsidize the scooter business as you do with bikes, and let's go. I mean, this could be like a interesting move by Thier then to try to use the Nextbike for going in this direction. And as we all mentioned and agreed that Nextbike has like a good standing and good public relations team. Cities love them. They know how to address the messages and pain points on city level. So let's see what they will do with Nextbike.
Exactly. You know what is quite interesting? When we were talking about Thier, I noticed that Alexandros and yourself, Augustine, mention scooters. It's like the scooters is like the main model of Thier, or like you see Thier as a scooter company. But for me, I see Thier really as a mobility company, right? They own different technology. They also own the whole charging. I mean, they bought the charging company, right? And I think when I think about Thier, I don't actually think about scooters anymore.
For me, I have to say I don't yet agree. By the way, PushMe is the company that we're talking about. I mean, they bought the hardware of Coop many years ago, 2020, if I remember correctly, and they only start expanding now a couple of months ago in Germany. Before that, there was just a city. With bikes, they haven't done that much until basically Nextbike, because before they had, I think, a couple of pilots, only one in UK, New York, one in Norway, and somewhere else. Maybe they launched. So for me, honestly, I mean, 90% of your vehicles and more are scooters. I used to be a scooter company, whereas, I don't know, other companies might have it a bit better, I would say. Like, for instance, I don't know, GoTo, the Israeli company, is also here now in Malta. They have EMI, they're in Madrid. They have basically all the different models. Go sharing, okay, mostly moto, but, they start getting a momentum. Revi here in Spain starts also going different modes as well. Started from scooters now. They probably have more operations actually with motors and bikes. So I believe, my at least view, some of these companies are a bit more multimodal, let's say, more mobility rather than Thier, at least not yet.
Yeah, you're true.
I agree. I mean, that Thier is also then like full in the like expansion phase and for the kick scooters. I mean, as a company and as a startup, I mean, you need to pick your battles, I would say. I think they went in this direction of like expanding like crazy with like these scooters, conquering a lot of markets, moving into small cities and towns as well. And like GoTo and others, or like Go Sharing, maybe they're more multimodal, but on the expansion they're not that fast and not that aggressive as Thier. I think they have more capacity to go this direction. I think for Thier it takes a lot of attention, or a lot of attention is needed to get the expansion and right. That was the main focus. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with Alexandros as well. I might watch too much marketing from Thier on LinkedIn. But anyways, before we move from this topic, what I never understood is why others raised, at least at a certain point, as much money as Thier, but they never expanded through acquisitions, which from my point of view, looking from the outside as a small player, it made sense to buy other players locally instead of like having a whole team trying to learn, the things there. Thierry did it, and I think Thierry is one of the only. Go Sharing is doing it as well. And what do you guys think? Like, why did other companies also raise a lot of money? Actually, I saw. I think Voy raised 500 million. So that's a lot of money.
It's a good point. I see Augustine is ready to say something, so I will leave it to him for now.
Yeah, I think you need to. Yeah, I think regarding tier, I mean, you need to see, okay, have they really acquired the company as a whole, or just like parts of it, like technology, for example, or like licenses and like with wind in Italy, or like tenders they won. I think that's that. We need to see, okay, what have they really acquired in their move. And I think like overall, it's like quite challenging to buy a company with a different culture and to integrate it in your setup. They have like different culture, different team, different IT. I mean, as a like fast scaling startup, you want to focus on your stuff, and I think you don't have the capacity to deal and also with like all the side hassles. And maybe also like the kind of failed acquisition of Cirque by Bird was also like a warning signal. Yeah, I mean, they're like, when was it, 2019, early 2020? I mean, basically Cirque was dead a couple of weeks after the deal. I think Bird lost a lot of money there. All the people left. So I think that's also like could be seen as a signal or a sign that it's super tricky to integrate and like a company that you acquire. And I think a lot of people are like, or companies and leaders are shy of it. They try to move on, and with their like own progress, with their own like team, and to try to push others out of the market, because as we discussed earlier, customers are not loyal. Yeah, I mean, if one brand of scooters isn't around anymore, nobody cares. Yeah, I mean, I think that there might be also a reason that they that they are happy about every like scooter brand that's disappearing from the scene, because that means more customers for their own scooter brand. It might be cheaper and less complex to do it this way.
Exactly. And I wanted to come back to the value that these different companies add, right? Because when Bird purchased Cirque, I think they purchased Cirque more for the different operational areas of Cirque rather than the team or the technology, because I think the technology is not really. I mean, we all started with white label software, and we all,
at that time was nothing, indeed.
Not innovative, right? So I would say that I think maybe Bird bought Cirque for the operational areas, because the more people you can serve, the more areas you can serve. I guess that is the value that you can sell to the investors, right? Because at the end of the day, all the scooters are all maybe OKAI or Segway, different colors. And as you mentioned, the user doesn't really care, as long as they can get from A to B with a good scooter, which is mostly OKAI or Segway. So, but yeah.
But how many people stayed with like Bird then after the acquisition? I haven't done any analysis, but my assumption out of the industry is that a lot of like people left and that they didn't really. I mean, either that the operations quality of Cirque was not as good as expected, so they basically fall apart after the acquisition, or like Bird was not able to integrate these people and operations setup as they expected. So I don't know where I don't have any insights there, but like from outside perspective is that this narrative didn't play out. I mean, or that's at least what I would say personally, and what I would say is the industry opinion here.
Exactly.
Actually, maybe to jump, it's interesting that you say that, because I have been thinking that, Cirque basically, I remember, acquired a very small company in Madrid first. And I I remember also for some reason they were changing the name all the time, Cirque that is. I don't know why they were doing that from Flash to Cirque. Anyways, then Bird bought them. Bird also bought Scoot Networks. So in my opinion, at least until that time, let's say before, the crisis, right, with COVID, Bird seemed to be doing fine. Of course, you could say, well, how much you pay for each company, right? And indeed, what did you get in returns? Because at that time, you didn't have permits. Of course, you might have, as you said, Constantine, basically Cirque being the leader at that time, because he was the leader probably in Europe. But the technology, not really, because white label. Scooters, not really, because everybody was still looking to see what they're doing, although the Cirque scooter and the Flash scooter were pretty decent. So yeah, maybe they overpaid things. Maybe, for instance, Bird, since we were discussing also before why they're doing, where are they now, where they're going, maybe they, didn't expect, let's say, the crisis, and then suddenly like, oop, okay, what can we do now? So I think this is probably what happened, at least with Bird, because otherwise, expansion-wise, marketing-wise, things like that, they were not that bad.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not sure what happened to Scoot's network, actually. That is more in the United States, right? Do you guys know something about that?
I mean, they were in Barcelona as well. But yeah, they had this moped or something like that. I don't know what happened. Yeah, because they announced the hardware even in 2020. So while the crisis was ahead. But yeah, nothing is happening. So I think it's, again, they kind of consolidate what you have. Don't expand, with different hardware, because that needs R&D and it needs testing and needs to order different parts. I mean, spare parts, also to fix them. Need to train the people. Need potentially, different logistics as well behind it. And I know that also from Dott. The scooter versus the bike is completely different. So yeah. I suppose, and honestly, for me, it will make sense. This will probably be the reason why. Although they do now launch the e-bikes, so I'm not so sure, right? Because they have the OKAI bikes in Rome and other places now. In Madrid they launched, and some other UK, I'm not so sure. Anyways, they have like 5 markets now in Europe with the bikes.
Exactly, and that's actually a great transition to the next topic that I wanted to discuss, which is hardware. In 2018, Santa Monica, Bird, Segway ES4, I think, or maybe even the model before. And then everybody was using Segway ES4, Spen, all over Europe as well. We all started with Segway ES4. But then after, some iterations, obviously Dott, I think Dott was the first. I had, actually Maxime was on the podcast, and he explained how he and his team looked at the market, how they looked at the hardware and the product, and how they were like, okay, we can not really launch with a Segway S4 because that is not a shared product, right? And they really, looked for someone who could provide a more like stable scooter. I think the first Dott scooter set the standard for users, for companies, to be like, okay, this really matters. This is important for the users, especially in Brussels, because I remember using,
yes,
I think it might have been like a Segway S4 Tiers, and then using a Dott. I mean, the experience in Stone, it was clear. It was clear, and I think from that point on, all these other companies started to put a lot more attention on the experience, right? And that is when OKAI came in. So tell me a little bit about like the whole, like the hardware, like how did you experience the whole hardware evolution? The iterations were quite fast, no? Especially in terms of the swappable batteries, I think, because it's only been 2 years or maybe 3 years, right?
Since 2020, basically, the first models appear, yeah. So,
oh wow,
2 years, yeah. And actually, the swappable battery that was on the deck to the swappable battery that is external was almost nothing. Probably because also of supply issues or whatever, but I think it was less than 6 months even, which was quite interesting.
So OKAI took over the whole market and since 2020, because everybody is using basically OKAI, right?
Well, I wouldn't say since 2020, but it is true. But to go at least back I remember also in Brussels using Dott. I mean, okay, I came from automotive, right? And Toyota is quite famous for the quality that they built in. And I was looking at the ES4s. I'm like, man, that doesn't look very safe. I'm not putting myself up there. I mean, I tried it obviously, but no. And then I remember I saw the quick wheels, if I recall. Those were the brand, and I was like, yeah, that's it.
You know who also had a good
Something
scooter?
you were going to say?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Zego had also a good scooter, but it got acquired by Bolt. And actually, I tested the Zego scooter back in 2019 in Brussels. I think I might have been the first to.
I don't know this company.
Bolt acquired it. I think Augustine might know about this.
You mean STIGO, right? STIGO, right?
STIGO.
Yeah.
I don't remember that name.
Yeah,
that was basically the basis of the
quality scooter as well.
The Model 4 that we have in the markets now at Bolt, before they also switched to OKAI. But as we have learned, they're pushing in both directions. So I'm looking forward then also to the Bolt 4 Plus, how they will call it, and to see the improvements there. But there, I think at the beginning it was like the Segway ES4. It was available like super fast, and there it was like, okay, let's grab the markets, let's think about hardware later. And then Segway did a great job there to push it, the scooter model, to the different markets in Europe and in the US. There was no regulation or licensing. It also changed if you look to Germany or Switzerland, for example. And then also like other shuttle providers, like software providers like Wunder. Also they optimized their solution for like the Segway scooter, and then also like automotive OEMs like Daimler with Hive and so on. They also jumped on this wagon, to launch with the ES4. But what happened since then is like in the different iterations, it's amazing. It's like swappable battery first, then like more and more security technology, like lane changing indicators. Now what you have then there, like on sidewalk detection technology on the scooters, like vision stuff and so on. That's like, and this all within a couple of years, 2 to 3 years. That's incredible how fast the industry is moving there. Also like with OKAI and Segway, there are two companies, I would say, and all the other scooter providers that are quite agile as well. They don't wait until, or like the automotive industry, a couple of years until they release then a new product. Basically they learn what will need to be improved, and then within a couple of months you have it on the streets, and all the big companies are buying it then and put it like into their fleets. I think that's a very dynamic and exciting area at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Segway really helped the industry start off, right? Because in terms of like connectivity, the IoT modules with comodule, and also Segway had their own IoT that really helped with the whole connectivity and the whole like sharing, right? But talking about comodule, Augustine, I've seen your video of testing the tool comodule scooter. I know comodule is an IoT provider. They also have their Coast Cycle. I'm not sure if they have launched it yet, but when I think so, when I look at an IoT provider who has all the data of all these IoT modules going into hardware, and they also built their own factory in their home country, right? So they invested a lot of money. So basically, they probably want to take the production home, have a control over the whole production chain. When I look at the IoT company that has all that data going into hardware, it makes me wonder, do they know something we don't know? Because we all know that the hardware industry is a tough industry. Many have tried to make an e-bike. Many have tried to make their own e-scooter. They all failed.
I think one one or something that they try to mitigate is the trend in the industry that like external IoT devices. I mean, with the OKAI like in-house capabilities in this direction and with Segway and so on. I mean, they're like I would say that the gold rush at Comodule and other IoT providers is over, because a lot of companies, other hardware providers are not buying like the external IoT device from them. They build it in-house and have it fully integrated in the scooter. I guess they definitely have a lot of data on the scooters. I mean, they have like a great engineering team and production capabilities. I think it's also not that expensive to like produce them there in the Baltics. I think that's also like a competitive advantage they have in Europe. So I think they put everything there together and try to basically build another like business vertical to have like a sustainable business, because like selling external IoT devices for like micromobility might become trickier, and that's a great option to basically compensate for that.
Exactly. That's actually a great point that I hadn't thought about, because we just discussed that OKAI is winning the market. If OKAI has their own internal IoT modules and everybody is using the OKAI scooters and bikes, then where does that leave comodule, right? So it makes sense that comodule would then come with their own scooter, right? That's a great point. I hadn't thought about this. Thank you. Yeah, that's great insight.
And maybe they're also thinking about different markets and like different customers. I'm not sure if like a huge fleet operator will buy those scooters, but I mean, as I said at the beginning, like the industry is just starting. I mean, look at what Google is now doing with like Unagi in like the US, where they buy like the Unagi scooters for like their employees. I mean, think about all the companies, corporates that want to go into the micromobility, or like hotels that want to offer like a small fleet. I mean, these might not be the right customers for like a Segway or like OKAI, because like, this wouldn't be a match. But maybe like that's then a great customer like base for like companies like comodule or like Feilchen or like all the others that have like great hardware. But maybe are like starting a bit late into the market.
Yeah, exactly. What about
maybe to add, I will say, well, diversification is very important. So Augustine said it very well. I'm pretty sure, I mean, I don't know the numbers, but I'm pretty sure the whole business of comodule, of Wunder, or whoever else is, decreasing, and you have to see what else can you do, what is your competitive advantage. They do have for sure a lot of data, and probably, based on that data and their experience, they're thinking of something. But actually, as Augustine said, and this is something that I see actually with one of the projects that I'm doing with Seat Codes, they have a platform, but they try to sell it around to smaller operators or cities or businesses. And indeed, this is a place that is completely underdeveloped. We do know operators, obviously, share mobility operators, that they focus on the cities.
Yeah.
But if I'm a company, and I'm let's say a huge company, or even if I'm not, but let's say my salespeople have to go in the city center or whatever, then the whole share mobility comes into play again. Why should I take, for instance, in Barcelona or Brussels, that Constantine, why should I take a car, with all the traffic and everything? Whereas the impact, let's say, of a bicycle is completely different. So going back to something that I was said, the labor cost normally for the Baltics and East Europe is less than 10 euros per hour. Whereas, for instance, in France, Belgium, Germany is 40 euros per hour. So that already gives a competitive advantage. And if I'm a small operator that I just want, let's say 50 scooters in a small town in Slovakia or whatever, I will not go to one of the big ones, because either way they have MOQs, right? Minimum order quantities. So in my opinion, it does make sense to have all the other companies that manufacture and design. But yes, if we talk about share mobility operators in big cities, then we have only the big two. Well, maybe we can put big three, if we add Acton or someone else, but that game is more or less, set, right? But for the smaller cities, smaller operators, companies or whatever, completely underdeveloped, and other solutions, cheaper as well, will make more sense.
Exactly. And also, you mentioned a good point about differentiation and stuff. I think because Philip Mueller was on the podcast a while ago, and all these, software company, like white label companies, when the pandemic hit, the whole revenue stopped, right? Because the operators could not operate anymore. There was lockdown, so there was no money coming in. And I think they started thinking, we can't put our eggs in one basket, right? Maybe we need to also differentiate and stuff like that. I think maybe that also played a role. I know we are running out of time, but I have a few more other questions that I really, really want to have your opinion on. One of them, one that I really, really have been pushing and I admire, is the local strategy. Dott is doing that very well. When I look, I think a week or two ago, Dott launched a new operations center in the city of Brussels. They employ local people. But what is your opinion? Because not everybody is doing that. Why is not everybody doing that? Because when I look at Dott, they are doing a great job. They are winning. They are launching in Ghent now as well. So why are others not doing that? Because I think that's a clear path.
I think it's it's part of the company culture. Yeah, I mean, Dott is since beginning they're doing an amazing job with slow expansion, putting a lot of focus on the team, on then also social benefits for the team, get the people in house. I think this was quite unique. Yeah, I mean, they did it when all the others like Cirque and Bird and Lime and you can name all the others, when they hired like crazy. Yeah, basically after first phone call maybe. But yeah, it's in long term, it plays out. Yeah, as you see, I mean, Dott is doing a great job. And then others, I mean, maybe that was also a reason why the Cirque and Bertie was not that successful from my point of view, because I mean, they had completely different culture, way more towards hire and fire than what you see at Dott. And yeah, they understood it very well that this is the way to build a sustainable business, and also that this is valued then by the cities. Yeah, great move. And I also like to see what they are doing and how they progress on this side. I think others could take this as an example and apply some parts of their strategy as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think that the culture play a huge role, because if you think about it, Uber, Lime, Birds, they are American companies, and usually these companies are looking more for expansion. Is in the DNA, let's say, of Americans. But when these companies come in Europe, the cities and even the people that work there might see it differently, right? So if I would be, let's say, a battery swapper, a juicer, or whatever, and the company doesn't care that much, then I wouldn't care as well. I will try to get the maximum value that I can out of it. But that means that probably it's a momentarily gig for me, and well, I don't care about the quality necessarily of the work. So that's what Dott have done for me. I can tell you, it's probably one of my favorite micromobility operators still today, because of the culture, because of the way that they handle everything. Because I remember even in Brussels, as a customer, seeing everything being a bit messy, and then suddenly you see the scooters of Dott being carefully positioned out of the way. So then you know that somebody cared for it. So that definitely play a role, the culture, let's say, of each company. Then I would say that I thought that other companies will follow that way, like when Tier basically start getting more money, or even Voi. Voi is a bit more closer to Dott, but still some of these companies, well, especially Tier now, uses a lot of, let's say, external help, which I'm not so sure how that also benefits in the long term. And something else that I've seen for some of the projects that I've done as a freelance, I talk with some cities, and the feedback, let's say, for companies like Dott versus the other companies that we mentioned before, like Lime, is completely different. It's day and night completely, and that changes things. It's basically what you see of the company, and when you do a tender, that will impact as well things.
So I will ask you a very difficult question. Where do you think the market is going within the next 6 months? And I have a few things that maybe you could answer. I mean, you can relate to. For example, what about the charging infrastructure? That I know Thierry bought the PushMe company, I think 2 years ago now. They haven't really launched. Maybe I think in London they did a test. Will that play a role?
Germany as well.
Okay. Will that play
They have a couple. They have for sure more than 15 cities.
If you could predict the next 6 months, what would you say? What would you say would play a role in the companies that would be, the top 3, for example?
Top 3 as well.
You can go first now, Aléxandros.
Yeah, you will say that. I hear you will say that. Well, in the end, it's something that I always try to simplify, even when I was at Toyota, right? It's the classic move that I do all the time. Is this. So increase revenue, reduce costs. So this is something that people try to do. Reduce costs is from the operation side, increase revenues, well, from utilization, some marketing efforts or whatever else. Let's say, PushMe solution or the energy now, tier energy as they call it, is quite clever overall. But of course that needs B2B small type of partnerships all around, right? You need to go literally to the corner shop and then ask them, hey, can you put that? Because if you do, you are, probably really big as tier. Maybe somebody, will come to you and buy something. And actually they launched a while back some numbers. I don't remember now. I don't believe those numbers, I can tell you already. But anyway, there was like an increase, I don't know, to minimum 20% based on some pilots that they do or some estimations. So if you have a person that basically has to leave the warehouse or the office or whatever to do a round, let's say, for the batteries, and this is a significant cost, right? Especially, in markets as Germany or whatever, as we mentioned before, they have high labor costs. Can you externalize it? This is basically where that idea comes. And well, it's obviously the idea from Google, right? It's not something new. I think it's quite interesting. As a consumer, will I do it? Will I even care about it? No. So they have somehow to attract me to do that, because otherwise, why the hell should I do the job? Honestly speaking, I'm very tough about it, but it's the same with the supermarkets. Me scanning all the parts, I don't work here. So anyways, I think it's quite a differentiation with us. I see Bolt, for instance, we didn't mention them today, but they do something different basically with all the charging ports, let's say the infrastructure. The others are kind of in between with the removable batteries. So we don't know exactly where to go. In my opinion, to go back to what we said before, as tier, if I was there in the strategy department, I will utilize literally Nextbike and talk to the cities to have a similar system. So we do see these free floating / virtual stations. I do think we're heading that way to kind of answer it. And therefore, if we're that way, it makes sense that there are specific stations to change the batteries or wherever. I don't know if it will be necessarily the next 6 months, but definitely in the next couple of years, we will see that happening. I mean, it's already for bikes, and it will be for cars as well, because that will happen for motors as well. Why not the scooters? So you have one station for everything.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. And we don't always, personally, I don't always mention a Bolt, because they are such a big company. Bolt is like basically the Uber of Europe, right? They are even in Africa, bike share, scooter share, car share, food. Bolt is an amazing company, and sometimes I forget to mention them because I don't see them as these other startups. So, but what about you, Augustine?
Yeah, a few points to add to what Aléxandros said. I think I want to repeat what I said at the beginning. You're just like at the start. I mean, that's not within the next 6 months, but even in long term, there's a huge potential for shared micromobility and also owned micromobility in the cities. I think we will see like a boost there. Also, if cities are investing more now in the infrastructure, and then also like parking infrastructure, riding infrastructure, and so on. I think this is like a super positive trend that we see. Then in terms of like cities, I would also say within the next 6 months, we will see like more regulations and more cities trying to get control of what's happening on on the streets. This will be on their side. So that's then also important from like operator side to have like a strong public policy play. Yeah, with like battery networks, with like social security rules for like employees, what Dott is doing, and so on. So I think this will be also like what we will see more in the next couple of months, so that the operators like strengthen their position and they play with the cities. And then regarding like hardware and also like batteries, I would like to see that not only like tiers leveraging their next bike, I would like to see that the whole industry is coming together and basically defining a battery standard, so that there will be a like unique or like a unified standardized infrastructure of batteries in the cities, because like as Aléxandros mentioned, it's like quite expensive to build it, and it's already complex for the users to differentiate between all the different operators and like solutions they have. Yeah, with one I can get like a ride discount when I charge the battery. With another one, I can get a ride discount when I park it in a certain area, etc., etc. So it's not very user friendly. I think now, as the industry is heading towards the same direction with like swappable batteries, often the same scooter hardware, I think this would also make sense to work closer together there across the different brands. And one last point, what I would say that's also getting more attention is like then the implementation and multi-modal platforms. Yeah. Like what we see with FreeNow, with their like mobility platform, but also what Bold is doing with like their own platform, and then also what cities are doing with the solutions they play. I think this will also something that it's still more like an experimental phase, I would say. Yeah, let's see if it plays out, but definitely like shared mobility players, micromobility players, also car sharing, ride hailing, shuttles, and so on. They will join forces to build their like platforms. To have then like also like a reduced cost base, as Aléxandros mentioned, and also to have like a strong public policy play. I think that's also like a point we will see more in the next couple of months.
Exactly. Wow, man, I had so many other questions, but I know we are running out of time.
But you're doing like a second season, right? So let's talk again.
The second season is going to be called The Early Days. So it's not only about mobility. So I will have other people on.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming to the early days of micromobility. Obviously, you guys have been around since the early days, and thank you very much for the contribution to the industry, and thank you for being on the Early Days podcast.
This podcast, Konstantin, and also for like your voice on Twitter and what you share, and like real pleasure to be in the podcast with both of you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, likewise. It's good to interact with like-minded people. So definitely a pleasure, honestly, to spend this, let's say, afternoon with both of you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.